Born to Achieve. Born to Achieve. Welcome to Born to Achieve podcast, the show that inspires and motivates you to unlock your full potential and achieve your goals. With your host, Warren Andrew Pinder. Let's get started on this week's episode of Born to Achieve. Born to Achieve.
I am born to achieve greatness, and so are you. On this episode of the Born to Achieve Greatness podcast, we have a very special guest, Mr. Izzy Baker, who is more than just a voice behind the mic. He's a movement as the dynamic host of PSA, the mental health podcast. Izzy has built a platform that challenges the narrative surrounding men's mental health, self-improvement, and personal growth. With his bold, no-nonsense approach, he bridges the gap between tough conversations and real solutions, making mental wellness accessible to the modern man. It's a tough conversation, so let's bring you in right now to tell us about that. Mental health, this important subject, mental health with men.
It's one of those things where it's needed because it's not done often. I feel like people are talking about it a lot more these days, but I feel as though it is still a conversation that it's still kind of taboo. It's still kind of taboo. And when I first started the podcast, that wasn't even a goal. The goal was just because I was so irritated by people my age at the time when I started at the ripe age of 23. And there was so many people who were stuck in their ways at 23. And I just thought that was strange. And so I wanted to create a platform where we could argue both sides of the ball, and even if you didn't necessarily agree. And it's kind of then transitioned into a podcast for young mental health conscious millennial men who struggle with making healthy decisions. So,
And what have you found to be some of the issues that our men are faced with regarding mental health?
Well, the main one is people don't want to talk about it. When men don't want to talk about it, they think, oh, that's stupid. I remember I was which is funny how the world we're in now, the types of podcasts that exist now, or that are popular now, I'll say that, because they've always been around. But I was at a podcast studio downtown. I always tell this story not to blast the person, because me and the person we're good coworkers, or I guess you could use the phrase coworkers. We content create together, so he's a good person at heart. And when I broke down the purpose of my podcast, and this was, I believe, 2022, and I remember he said, well, do you think people care about that? And I said, they do unintentionally, because when most people think of mental health, they think of mental illness. But the definition of mental health is a study of how we act, think, and feel. So you care about why you can't stay in a relationship. You care about, I'm tired of this job. I hate this job. Where do I go from here? You care about the fact that, you've been friends with somebody for umpteen years and you just now realizing they're a hater. All of those topics are under the umbrella of the definition that I explained of mental health. So, yeah.
So dive in a bit, that definition, how you act, thought, and think. Explain to our listeners, right? So, it's not that where it's derived and your explanation of it.
So basically, when I started my podcast, I remember my dad, who was a counselor, was like, well, this is mental health. And I'm like, no, because mental health is what I thought it was. He even was like, no, that's mental illness. Mental health is, everybody has mental health, but not everybody has mental illness. And I'm not going to lie, I was hesitant with speaking on mental health. One, because I'm not an expert, which actually became my advantage. And two, because I felt as though I'm a very no nonsense type of person. And when people think of mental health, they think of, the Disney Channel fluff and, oh, we're going to get through this and you're so good and all of that. And from my approach, it's more so about accountability. And even so, where I called myself out, because I had a friend one time who threw, those friends, and sometimes they do it unintentionally. Some of them do it on purpose. That's a podcast episode. But those friends that throw kind of those digs, and it was kind of like, well, how are you a mental health advocate when you get on, you talk about people? I said, well, which he actually was stunned at my response because I said, well, I explained the definition of mental health, and I also said I'm an advocate, not an expert. And I said, also, I'm the person that brings these conversations to the forefront, and I get the people who are the experts to dispel, dissect, and critique some of these theories and also help us with overcoming these issues that we struggle with because I am my target audience while still allowing for those relatable conversations. So he didn't have anything to say after that.
Yeah, you can't. But so how does the mental illness and mental health, right? What's the correlation? What is it?
Well, like I said, which is good to I think to know, and we're in clippable material when I say there's a different people. Everybody has mental health, but not everybody has mental illness. So mental illness is the depressions, the schizophrenias, the things that you can get diagnosed with, and me, I was someone diagnosed with general anxiety, or not general anxiety. I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression back in the day. No longer now.
Right.
And so I was actually diagnosed on paper. But a lot of times people say like they take ownership of things, which words have power. The Bible tells us that. So when you're saying, oh, my anxiety, I don't say my anxiety. I might have said I might have had an anxiety at moment in the moment. I might have anxiety at that moment, but I'm not going to take ownership of that because you're taking possession over that. So when it comes to mental illness, these things that you're diagnosed with, not what you read on Wikipedia, not what you resonate with your favorite influencer who was diagnosed, and now you're saying, well, I have this too because it sounds like me. Go get diagnosed. And so if you do struggle with those things or have battles with things, because you can maybe have struggled with some anxiety about a topic, but that doesn't mean you have it all the time. We have the guests who are the anxiety coaches or the licensed therapists or the psychologists, or, you can't get no sleep. You've been diagnosed with insomnia. I didn't have a sleep expert on, so we pick those brains of those people as well. And what I like about the diversity of my podcast is the fact that I remember one week I had the sleep expert, a nice white lady, soft spoken. And then the next episode was a relatable episode with my homeboy from St. Louis, who is a clothing designer. And that episode, the tones were totally different.
Different, yeah.
But the goal was still the same.
Yeah. Now, when we speak of anxiety, today with everything that we see on socials, the trending, young men and women are somewhat challenged, because they see what they want. They see exactly what their life, they see exactly what they want to achieve in terms of what is presented to them on these outlets. And it creates anxiety. How can we help these young persons to understand that things that don't happen now that they want to happen now is causing may push them into having an anxiety attack, and it's not good. So from your mental health, how do they tune that up? How do they touch into that and benefit and understanding to manage the anxiety?
The main thing is you have to know your triggers, and certain things trigger certain people. Like I know I don't watch, I try to, I'm also a big on social media and doom scrolling. Sometimes we can get on social media, and which I've struggled with, I'm not gonna lie, and just scrolling. And, I tend not to scroll on things that upset me, but some people can't control that. So you have to know what triggers you and have to know like, I might need to take a break from this today. I might need to back up from this today. And you have to know how to pause, have to distance yourself. I think sometimes people get caught up in trying to, how you say, please the masses and trying to be like everybody else. And so I believe my thoughts is it's just best to know when to take breaks and to know every battle is not your battle. I remember my therapist used to tell me that. She was like, when I would speak on certain things, she was like, that's not your battle. And sometimes there are things that trigger us. And I'm a person who, if I see ignorance, I used to have to respond to everything. And especially if it's somebody I know, but now I can get irritated for a hot second and then just kind of keep scrolling. That's why I laugh when people feel the need to let me know something on my comment section, because you have no self-control.
Yeah. So you're basically advocating that persons don't get consumed with what they're actually seeing, and it turns right back into what you're talking about, mental health, being able to feel and touch, and to know what's your trigger, that it doesn't get you, anxious and begin to affect, your mental well-being, so like literally. So you're a proponent of persons taking control and understanding, trying to see deep into their purpose are not to basically managing your stress. That's
Mm-hmm.
basic. I think that's what you're saying. You put yourself in a position to manage your stress. The influence and inspiration. Did anyone mentor you, your families, and how did you tap into the journey that you're on, assisting men regarding mental health?
So I do have a mentor. His name is Jay Barnett, and he's a therapist. He's a best-selling author. He someone who I met through my father years ago, and we've stayed in contact. And he's actually somebody who he's put me on his team, with helping do some writing and things for that for him. But he's someone who's on these different podcasts and on these different in his journey in the mental health space. And I watched him from the grind, just speaking engagements and all these different things. And so we've stayed in connections. And like I said, he's somebody I've kind of watched from afar from the mental health aspect. And then we've connected in real life, but several times, but I'm just saying from that. Now, when it comes to mentoring as far as mental health, I guess I could use him as that. As far as podcasting goes, it was just me. I remember when I first got the podcast started and trying to figure out back in 2018, how to make a popping podcast. I remember just Googling, like the top 10 podcasts and what was they doing? What stood out about them so I could make, put out the best content. But now it's just all about, I've watched people in my family, come undone because their mental health wasn't together, or, fighting depression and fighting bitterness and all these things. And it's just like a cluster of things at once. And for me, I just will always say I'm not going to be like that. I was just like both parents, like, and I don't ever shame working a regular job, but I just knew certain things I would never be happy in doing. And I just felt like, are we just supposed to come on this earth? And I watched my grandmother, who now is 90 years old, and she she still worries about bills. And I'm like, I don't want to be 90 years old worrying about bills. So I think the alternative route, which most people think, which is demonic, is, well, let me just unalive myself so I don't even have to worry about that. Or let me just pray God takes me out early. And I don't believe that was our portion. I don't believe we're supposed to be struggling with bills and at still at an old age. And a lot of it is financial mismanagement, but also a lot of it is lack of purpose. And I've watched people in my family don't know their purpose. 60 years old, don't know what they're called to do. You asking them what they called to do, they start talking about, I like doing hair. Where is that coming from? Like, what do you mean? Oh, well, I find this interesting. What is your purpose? You still not answering. So I think for me, I'm all about helping people find their purpose.
Oh, certainly, most certainly. Now, what are the triggers, right, for someone to recognize that it could be a mental health crisis?
I think that when you realize you don't have control of your thoughts, and I think that when you don't have a safe outlet, because I've known some people, they'll say like, I don't need a therapist. My friends are my therapists. And I hate that logic. Or I know one person, sometimes, especially men, they'll get a girlfriend or a wife and they just unload on her. And it's like, now she going through it because you going through it. And then that turns into a buildup and people don't see that.
Yeah.
So I think it's about getting to the point where you feel like where you're stuck. There we go. You feel stuck and you don't know where to go next. I think that's a good indicator, because it's like, I don't know what else to do. And, suicide is not an option, although some people have considered it. I think that when you get to the point when you start considering that, that's when it's like, okay, I need to do something.
Wow. So when should they seek medical help versus counseling?
Well, like I said, just to reiterate, I am not the expert, but I will find them. But because PSA, the mental health podcast, is for entertainment, educational purposes only, and not a replacement for seeking professional help.
Exactly.
But what I can say, based on things that have been said on my episodes by licensed professionals, is until you can afford a therapist, which I always reiterate, check and see if your job offers it. I know education in Texas is covered in those fees. And I know if you're in college, most colleges cover them. Texas Southern covered it back in 2016. So if you are a student, so I'm sure they still do it now. And if you're in a master's program, say you are an adult, you're in a master's program, PhD, see if your college covers it, because it might. But to find good books and to find good podcasts until you can get to that find that therapist. And then even then, I don't want you to just take anybody, because everybody's not a fit. I was thankful that the 2 times I went to therapy that were both free of cost, they were both Black people. The first one was a Black lady, and the second was a Black man who was maybe 5 or 6 years older than me at the time. Well, he still is technically, but you know what I mean. So, yeah, I think those are the resources to go start with.
Yeah. And what are some of those books? What are some of those books that you would recommend the persons can tap into and learn from?
Well, for me, one of the books I read that really did something for me, I remember back in 2016 when I first really started reading for real, outside of like you had to read, was Cindy Trim's The Soul Fast. And it's not what you're eating, it's what's eating you. And a book I actually try to do once a year. Did I do it last year? I'm not sure, but I know I'm going to do it this year. It really gets you to the root of you. The first time I did the book, I was lying to myself. It was like, what is something you enjoy doing and wish you could get paid to do? And I said, sports attorney. I didn't want to do that. I just said it because I thought this is what I wanted to do. I didn't want to do that. He really asks you the questions about you. Some questions where you will probably pause and have to ask yourself, like, you don't know. You know what I'm saying? What excites you? What, though it just goes, it really digs in deep about you. And I think those are good. What's another good book I think somebody could read that'll help you on that journey? I never finished it, but it was a good book. Devon Franklin's The Hollywood Commandments was good. And then what's another book I'm thinking you could read that could really help with that? Those are the ones I can think off the top of my head right now. I have to come back with the list.
You're a relatively young man, right?
Yes.
How did you get, what would I say, interested? It's such a deep topic that's so important to so many.
I think because, when my dad kind of sparked the seed or planted the seed about that this is mental health, because even originally I just wanted, even to what you're saying, is still in-depth thought process to have a podcast to say, I want us to discuss both sides of the ball and be able to agree to disagree. So that's still, intellectual when you think about it. I just got tired of being around ignorance, and I really did. And it's one thing, like I said, because a lot of times, in some cases, both parties don't be wrong. And I've always been a person he was wrong here, this was wrong. But then it's like, everybody doesn't think the same. Everyone is wired differently. So where you might say, for example, great example, I work for a company and we had a little tiff because he told us to have something done within the next 24 hours. So he reached back out and was maybe he told us it's at 3:00 last minute. And then, which I was fine with 24 hours. And they came back at maybe like 6 or 7 o'clock that night. Like, hey, did you get it done? I'm like, no, you told me 24 hours. So where some people think, well, I'm thinking this is short, you would have got it out the way. My brain says you told me 24 hours. So if I get it done at 23 hours and 59 minutes, that's my business because you told me 24 hours.
Yeah.
And see, me and my mother have had debates about that. She's like, well, you can't do that. No, you can do that. And that's where you go wrong. And see, me, I challenge things. It'd be different if he said have it done in 6 hours and I did in 24 hours. You told me 24 hours. So I don't think like everybody else. And that has unfortunately got me in trouble. So I've been trying to open the perspectives for people who like me, who have those unique thought patterns that allow them to stand out.
Mm-hmm. In your circle, do you find that there are counterparts that are interested, that listen when you speak on this topic?
I have different groups of friends, and a shout out to my mother for that, because she's been an unintentional advocate of that, because I've always noticed she had different groups of friends. So you have different groups of friends. I've noticed my main group, I believe God has been dissolving certain relationships, just because of where I'm going and just kind of where they are now, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. But I'm able to spearhead a lot of these conversations in a simpler way with certain groups. So they don't realize we're having them. They're just dumbed down. And sometimes I can tell some people don't care, which is fine, because a lot of times they even tell content creators, and that your friends aren't necessarily your target audience. So if they don't celebrate it or support it, you really can't get mad because that's not their thing. So, but to answer the question, I have a group for that.
Yeah. But they don't feel as if you're trying to pick you or ask you, man, why are you getting so deep? What you trying to psychoanalyze
Sometimes, but because my podcast does blend humor, A lot of
Right.
times there is a lot of jokes involved. Great example, watch this, and they don't realize it. So one of my friends, he likes older women. So
Yeah.
we had a conversation about like, why do you like it or whatever. He made the comment, well, and I'm, gonna censor this what he said as much as
Yeah.
possible. But he said that he, had sexual relations with a woman who was 30 in their 30s when he was 15, who was one of his mother's friends. So
Right.
I said, and we laughed and grinned, and we were laughing about it. I said, "Oh, she's a predator. She was a predator."
Yeah.
And we was laughing about it, but it's kind of like the podcast. Like I'm laughing and we're joking, but this is the truth here, like this, which is satire. And we like she was a pedophile. I said that's
Yeah.
not okay. Because if it was the
Yeah.
genders were reversed, what would you be saying?
Exactly. Yeah.
So
Yeah. You're cool. Yeah.
right.
Yeah. But it's something like, when young men are, you had hinted to me when we spoke about, that 30, working around the 30, the analogy you gave us in around age 30. Share that with us, man.
So on paper, she was a cougar. But what was I about to say? But I mean,
That's
she
the
was a
joke.
cougar.
That's the joke.
Well, now she wasn't a cougar. She was
She was
that and that
nah,
because
she was more than that.
no, and he's from Jersey, so that was in New Jersey. But what was the question again? You said
No, you gave an analogy of relating to age 30.
yeah. Oh, yeah, right. So at this point, on paper, the youngest millennial turns 29 this year.
Right.
So I thought that because my podcast is catered to young millennials, which is a difference because the oldest millennial, I believe, is 44 and the youngest is 29. So a lot of the topics I talk about, a 44-year-old may can relate, but not really. So I try
Right.
I say young millennials because that'll be 29 to like that 36 mark, around that age.
Yeah.
So I'm 30 now. What is an episode that will be dropping this season with a friend of mine who actually just turned 30, and then me being about to be 31, and just kind of recounting things that I did at this 30, and he plans to do it going into 30. And even years ago, I try to keep episodes that are consistent with the times. Like even years ago, I had a podcast series called The Quarter Life Crisis, which is actually a real thing. And I actually had episodes that centered around that 25 mark where people are upset because why am I not married? Why am I not don't have the dream job? Why am I not rich? Social media says I shouldn't. Even at 30, it's the same thing. Why am I not married? Why am I not rich? So to have those conversations to show it's okay. Two men in that episode who aren't necessarily at their goal, but on their journey. And with him is interesting because he was in a committed relationship for buku years and now that's over with. And this is somebody you plan to marry, and it's just like at 30 it's gone. And it's
Yeah.
just like, we grew up together basically. Now, so it's an interesting dynamic, especially for somebody who knew by 30 they would be married with kids with the love of their life and that's no longer around.
But all that creates pressure, right?
Right.
You know what pressure does, what they say.
Mm-hmm.
So
you look for an outlet.
Ties into your mental strength, eh? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's pretty cool, man.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Born to Achieve. Born to Achieve. We hope you found it informative, inspiring, and motivating. Born to Achieve. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and family. Stay focused on your goals, and we'll see you on the next episode of Born to Achieve.
Take advantage of this incredible opportunity. Sign up today and claim your free ebook at www.borntoachievegreatness.com. Follow us on Facebook at Achieve Movement Inc. Get your copy of Exploring Achieveland, A Journey to Realize Your Dreams, Motivational Stories of Kindness, Inspiring Stories for Kids on Amazon and Kindle.